Deep beneath the Misty Mountains, in halls carved by ancient hands, lies a story of glittering treasure and shadowed whispers, a tale that begins with a discovery too precious to ignore. Here, in the heart of Khazad-dûm, the dwarves uncovered a vein of Mithril, a metal so rare it shone like captured starlight, stronger than steel and more valuable than gold. King Durin and his people rejoiced, for this was a gift from the earth itself, a sign of their kingdom's greatness. But in the echoing depths, where torchlight barely reached, something else stirred, a presence long forgotten, a warning buried in the dark. This is not just a story of riches, but of choices, of pride, and of the price paid when ambition outweighs caution. As we step into this legend tonight, let the glow of Mithril and the echo of dwarven hammers guide you into rest. And before we go further, tell us, where are you listening from? What hour has found you tonight as we journey together into the depths of Moria? Share your moment with us in the comments below. Now, close your eyes and let the tale unfold. In the beginning, Khazad-dûm stood not as a place of whispered dread, but as a testament to Dwarven might, a kingdom hewn from living stone by the will of King Durin the Deathless. Under his command, chisels rang like bells in the deep, shaping vast chambers where pillars stretched taller than ancient trees, and bridges arched over bottomless chasms with the grace of spider's silk. Forges roared day and night, their flames reflecting off mithril veins like captured constellations, as smiths crafted weapons and goblets fit for legends. The dwarves called it a golden age, a time when their hammers sang in harmony with the mountain's bones. Yet as the delvings grew deeper, where air grew thin and torchlight flickered uncertainly, murmurs began to spread among the miners. Some spoke of a chill where no draft should wander, of tools left untouched yet found misplaced by morning. Others told of distant sounds, not the steady rhythm of picks, but something shapeless, a rustling like dry scales against stone. The eldest among them frowned, recalling half-remembered tales from Durin's first awakening, warnings etched in forgotten tongues, but pride drowned out doubt. The dwarves were masters of the deep, were they not? What had they to fear from shadows? And so the delving continued, each strike of the pick unearthing not just precious ore, but something else, a silence too heavy, a darkness that clung like smoke. Few listened when a young miner, his voice trembling, claimed the echoes had begun to echo back. Mithril became the lifeblood of Khazad-dûm, flowing from the mountain's heart like a river of silver light. The dwarves' forges worked ceaselessly, hammering the precious metal into delicate filigree for the elves of Lothlorien and sturdy armor for the kings of men. Caravans wound their way through mountain passes, laden with treasures that made Khazad-dûm's name whispered with awe in every realm. The dwarves grew proud, their halls glittering with wealth, their vaults overflowing, proof, they believed, that the earth itself favored them. Yet with each wagon sent west, the miners delved deeper, chasing veins that twisted like whispers into the dark. Nain, Durin's heir, strode through the grand halls with a kingly bearing, his cloak clasped with mithril, so pure it seemed woven from moonlight. When elder miners dared to speak of the unease in the deep, of the way torches guttered for no reason, of the way the mountain sometimes breathed, he laughed and clapped them on the shoulder. Fear is for those who lack faith, he'd say, lifting a goblet wrought with scenes of their triumphs. Look around you, What darkness could touch us now? The miners bowed their heads, but their silence was heavier than stone, and still, the delving continued. The deeper they went, the richer the seams became, as if the mountain itself was tempting them onward. Mithril flowed, kingdoms prospered, and Khazad-dûm's name echoed across Middle-earth like a promise. But in the quiet between hammer strikes, if you listen closely, you might hear it. A faint tremor, not of tools, but of something stirring in the blackness below. The dwarves chose to call it the rumble of their own greatness. The mountain knew better. The first warning came with silence, not the usual quiet of exhausted miners resting, but the hollow stillness of tools abandoned mid-strike. When the search party descended, their torches revealed pickaxes snapped like twigs, their iron heads twisted as if by monstrous hands. The tunnel walls bore no footprints, no signs of struggle, only 5 jagged gashes cut deep into the stone, each longer than a dwarf's forearm. The elders gathered in hushed circles, their beards trembling as they traced the marks with calloused fingers. Durin's Bane, one whispered, invoking a name not spoken in centuries. The others nodded grimly, recalling fragments of old prophecies. Fire in the deep, shadows with claws, a price for greed paid in blood. But Nain, newly crowned, tossed the broken pick aside with a scoff. Lost miners panic easily, he declared, his voice booming through the cavern. They dropped their tools in some side passage and fled like startled rabbits. His advisors stiffened, exchanging glances. Every dwarf knew their kin would sooner gnaw through stone than abandon their work unfinished. Yet the king's mithril crown gleamed with cold certainty as he gestured toward the untouched ore veins. Double the shifts, widen the tunnels. Let no dwarf say we turned back from our fortune over fairy tales. And so the hammers rang louder than ever, drowning out the elders' warnings. The miners worked with nervous haste, their laughter strained as they joked about ghosts in the cracks. But they kept their axes close, and none ventured far without a partner. Still, the tunnels crept downward, following the Mithril's siren call. The air grew thick with the scent of fear and forged smoke, and at night, when the fires burned low, some swore they heard scraping, as if something vast were moving just beyond the flickering light. One young miner, bolder than most, swore he saw torch flames bend sideways, pulled toward the dark as if by an unseen breath. The others made him drink until he forgot. Yet the mountain remembered. On the eve of the great feast, when the halls echoed with drunken songs of triumph, the watchman reported a new sound, not the clatter of celebration, but a distant drumbeat, slow and steady, rising from the roots of the world. The elders begged Nain to seal the deep delvings. The king, goblet in hand, silenced them with a toast. To Khazad-dûm, he roared, where stone bows to dwarven will. The cheers shook dust from the ceiling. Far below, something answered. The last strike of the pickaxe fell with a crack that echoed through the tunnels like thunder. Then the wall gave way. Stone crumbled, dust billowed, and the dwarves stumbled back as a gust of ancient air rushed past them, thick with the scent of brimstone and damp earth. Before them gaped a chamber, so vast their torchlight couldn't touch the ceiling, and the ground sloped away into blackness, deeper than any mine they'd ever delved. For a breathless moment, there was only silence. Then the mountain groaned. The tremor began as a whisper beneath their boots, a vibration that traveled up their legs like the warning growl of some great beast. Tools clattered from shaking hands as the floor pitched violently, sending dwarves crashing to their knees. From the abyss below came a sound no living creature should know, a roar so deep it shook the bones of the earth, rumbling up through stone and flesh until teeth chattered and torch flames bent horizontal, as if fleeing the dark. The miners needed no command. They ran, their shouts choked by dust and terror, boots slipping on loose stone as the tunnel behind them shuddered with another monstrous bellow. Some swore they felt heat licking at their backs, like the breath of a furnace. Others, in their panic, dropped their torches, casting frantic shadows that danced along the walls, shadows that moved wrong, stretching too long, twisting like things alive. Only young Boffer dared glance back. In the dying light, he saw the tunnel's mouth collapse, stone grinding against stone, as something massive shifted beyond. Not the slow crush of a cave-in, but something pushing, as if the mountain itself were closing a door. Then the darkness surged forward, swallowing the last glimmer of light, and his blood turned to ice. Above, in the echoing halls of Khazad-dûm, the feast grounds fell silent. Cups paused mid-sip, as the trembling reached even the highest chambers. Nain's crown slipped sideways as he clutched the throne, his face pale beneath his beard. Far below, the drumming had become a thunder, not the steady beat of dwarven hammers, but the ragged pulse of something waking. The elders needed no words. They knew, and then, from the depths, came fire. The ground split like rotten wood beneath their feet. From the chasm rose not just fire, but a shadow given form. A creature taller than 3 dwarves stacked upon one another, its mane aflame, licking the cavern's ceiling as it straightened to its full, terrible height. The Balrog's wings, whether flesh or smoke, none dared look long enough to tell, unfurled with a sound like tearing parchment, casting a darkness that swallowed torchlight whole. King Nain's mithril crown clattered to the stone as he staggered back, his defiance crumbling like the tunnel walls. The beast's whip snapped forward, a serpent of living fire, and where it struck, stone melted and flesh burned away to bone. Screams filled the halls as dwarves scattered, their axes and hammers useless against the demon's hide. Some stood their ground, shields raised in vain. Their bravery lasted only as long as it took for the Balrog's sword to cleave through steel like wet cloth. Others fled toward the upper galleries, their soot-streaked faces twisted with a terror their ancestors had never known. The elders shouted orders, hurting the young and wounded ahead of them, their voices raw with grief. Seal the gates, they roared, though every dwarf knew what it meant. To trap the beast below was to abandon their kin, their forges, their very legacy to the dark. But survival has a way of sharpening decisions. With a final, shuddering groan, the great stone doors slammed shut, their runes flaring once before dimming forever. The echoes of the Balrog's roar faded behind them, replaced by the ragged breathing of the survivors. Khazad-dûm, once the pride of Durin's line, now loomed around them like a tomb. The halls they'd carved with joy stood empty, their gold and mithril gleaming mockingly in the torchlight. A child clutched a smith's hammer too heavy for his hands, his whisper cutting deeper than any blade. Where do we go now? No one answered. The dwarves had delved too greedily, too deep, and the mountain had answered with fire and teeth. As they stumbled toward the eastern gates, the weight of their loss pressed heavier than any stone. Behind them, in the sealed depths, something stirred. The Balrog did not hunger for gold or mithril, It hungered for warmth, for life, and Khazad-dûm, for all its grandeur, had grown very, very cold. The survivors huddled in the upper halls, their once proud voices now hushed as if even speech might summon the horror below. Though the great gates stood sealed, the Balrog's presence seeped into the very stone, a stifling heat in the dead of night, the faintest scent of brimstone clinging to tapestries, and worse, the dreams. Miners woke gasping, their beards damp with sweat, unable to shake visions of fire in the dark. The elders spoke of courage, of rebuilding, but their hands trembled when they lit the forges, and the hammers rang with a hesitant, hollow rhythm. Word spread beyond the mountain. Caravans from Dale and Lorien arrived less often, their merchants eyeing the gates with uneasy glances. Where once they'd bartered eagerly for Mithril, now they traded in hurried whispers, loading their wagons before dusk. Stay the night, a Dwarven innkeeper offered a trader from Gondor. The man shook his head, his fingers tight around his reins. Not for all the gold in Erebor, he muttered, and the dwarves pretended not to hear. Slowly, the grand halls emptied. Families packed their ancestral belongings, not treasures of metal and gem, but the small things: a child's first carving, a wife's wedding braid clasp, a grandfather's journal filled with songs no one sang anymore. The lower districts fell silent first, their forges cold, their anvils gathering dust. Then the workshops closed, one by one, until only the stubborn remained, those who swore they'd feel the demons coming in time to flee. They worked in shifts, ears straining for the telltale tremors, axes never farther than arm's reach. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm had always measured their worth in stone and skill. Now, for the first time in their long history, they measured it in footsteps, the sound of boots retreating toward the eastern gate, the echo of a once great kingdom fading like mist in the dawn. The mountain watched them go, its peaks silent under the stars. Somewhere in the depths, something waited, patient as the roots of the world, listening for the day the hammers would call it forth again. But that day would not come in Durin's time. The last to leave were the elders, their backs bent not with age but with grief. As the great eastern gate groaned shut behind them, one paused, pressing a callous palm to the stone. No oath was sworn, no promise made, only a whisper, so soft the wind nearly stole it. Sleep well, old friend. And then at last Khazad-dûm stood empty, a kingdom of echoes, of memories, and of the thing that stirred in the dark, its fire burning low but not gone. Not yet. Centuries passed with the name Khazad-dûm, spoken only in whispers, its halls left to shadows and creeping things. The mountain kept its secrets, its doors sealed tight against the world, until the day a battered horn sounded at the eastern gate, its echo stirring dust from carvings older than kingdoms. Balin, son of Fundin, stood with his hand pressed to the stone, his small company of dwarves shifting behind him. They had followed Thorin Oakenshield to reclaim Erebor, but this was different. Khazad-dûm was no dragon's hoard to be won with arrows and luck. Somewhere in its depths, fire and teeth still waited. Yet Balin's eyes burned with a light not even the mountain's gloom could dim. Our ancestors walked these halls, he told his followers, his voice steady as iron. Shall we let their memory rot in the dark? The dwarves gripped their weapons tighter. No oath was needed, every beard bore braids for lost kin. Every cloak still smelled of the cold wind from Erebor's gates. With a heave, the great door creaked open, revealing a darkness so thick it seemed to push back against their torches. The first step inside was the hardest. The second carried the weight of history. For a time, hope flickered like a candle in the deep. Balin's folk cleared the upper halls of rubble, their hammers ringing where only silence had lived for ages. They rebuilt watchtowers in the 21st hall, lit forges in chambers where rusted tools still lay where hands had dropped them. Word spread west to the lonely mountain, and soon supply caravans wound their way through the Dimril Dale once more, bringing seed grain, fresh steel, and murmurs of a dwarven renaissance. Balin took the title Lord of Moria, his council table carved from a single slab of mithril streaked stone, a symbol, he said, of their unbroken spirit. But the mountain had not forgotten. The first orc raids came as autumn faded, swift and vicious, striking from tunnels even the elders hadn't mapped. Watchers posted at the Bridge of Khazad-dum vanished without sound, their helmets found days later, dented as if crushed by fists, the size of boulders. The dwarves tightened their ranks, barred side passages, yet still the attacks came. Supplies dwindled, the caravans stopped, and then, on a night when the torches guttered low, the drums began, not the sporadic thumps of orc war parties, but a deep, rhythmic pounding that shook loose pebbles from the ceilings. The miners knew that sound. They'd heard it in their grandfather's nightmares. Balin stood on the steps of the chamber of Mazarbul, his armor dull with soot, his voice the only steady thing in the trembling dark. "Hold the bridge," he ordered, though his warriors' faces told him they understood the truth. This was no skirmish. The orcs were but the tide before the storm. Somewhere below, in the roots of the world, fire had begun to climb. The battle raged for days. Orcs swarmed up from the deep like ants, from a kicked mound, their scimitars chipping at dwarven shields, grown thin from constant blows. Balin's folk fought with the frenzy of those who know there's no retreat, their axes slick with black blood, their beards stiff with grime. They held the bridge as long as mortals could, until the moment the cavern beyond erupted in a blast of heat, so intense it melted the buckles on their armor. The orcs themselves fell back, hissing, as a shadow filled the doorway. No chronicle records Balin's last words. Perhaps there were none. The dwarves of Moria died as they had lived, backs to the stone, weapons raised, their defiance outlasting their breath. When the last torch sputtered out, the mountain sighed, its halls settling into a silence heavier than any tomb. The Balrog did not roar in triumph. It simply turned, its ember eyes glowing faintly as it retreated into the depths, leaving only hoof prints seared into the rock, and a single broken axe, its handle carved with runes that read, "For Durin's heirs, while stone remembers." Far to the east, in the halls of Erebor, a candle guttered in an empty chamber. No one saw it go dark, but somewhere, in the space between heartbeat and echo, a dwarf king shivered, though the hearth burned bright. The mountain had spoken, and this time there would be no answer. The shadow that fell over Moria was not the quiet dark of an abandoned hall, but something alive, a creeping dread that clung to the stones like moss. Where dwarven laughter once echoed, now only wind whistled through empty chambers, carrying whispers of what had been lost. Travelers who dared pass near the mountains spoke of things seen from the corner of the eye, shapes flitting between pillars, the scrape of claws on rock just beyond torchlight, and worst of all, the drums. Not the rhythmic marches of orc patrols, but something deeper, slower, a pulse that seemed to rise from the roots of the world itself. At night, when the moon silvered the peaks, shepherds in the Dimril Dale would huddle closer to their fires, swearing the very air trembled. Some claim to see lights far beneath the mountain's surface, not the warm glow of forges, but a sullen red flicker, like embers in a beast's throat. Old tales resurfaced in taverns and market squares, told in hushed tones. Durin's Bane still walks, the elders muttered, tracing the stem of their pipes. It sleeps neither in day nor dark, only waits. Merchants bound for a region began to skirt the mountain entirely, adding days to their journeys rather than risk the high pass where the gates of Moria loom. Even the bravest among them would pause at the crossroads, eyes drawn unwillingly to those carven doors, now choked with ivy and spiderwebs. Had that marking always been there? That long, jagged scrape across the stone, blackened at the edges as if seared by fire. None stayed long enough to look closer, yet the mountain was not wholly silent. Those who listened really listened, might catch the faintest echo of hammers, ghostly and far off, as if the very stones remembered the dwarves who had fled. Some said it was the wind, others, wiser, knew better. Khazad-dûm had been more than halls and treasure. It had been a living thing, a heartbeat beneath the earth. Now that heartbeat belonged to something else, and so Moria slipped into legend, a name spoken with a shiver. Parents in Bree warned children not to wander too far, lest the black wings carry them off. Miners in the Blue Mountains checked over their shoulders twice before striking new veins. Even the elves, who had once traded Mithril for starlight, turned their faces from the mountain when they passed, as if its shadow could stain the soul. But shadows, like all things, have their seasons. In the quiet of the world, beneath the weight of years, the drums never ceased. They only grew patient. And far below, where no torch would ever reach again, something with eyes of flame uncurled its fingers, stretching them toward the warmth it sensed far, far above. The air inside the gates of Moria clung thick with the weight of centuries, stale and heavy against the fellowship's skin as they stepped into the darkness. Torchlight flickered timidly across walls, carved with runes, whose meanings even Gandalf could only half remember, echoes of a language spoken when the world was younger. "Stay close," the wizard murmured, his staff casting long shadows that seemed to flinch from the deeper blackness ahead. The company moved as one, their footsteps echoing too loudly in the hollow vastness, each breath tasting of dust and something older, something that watched. Pippin's fingers twitched toward a loose stone near the well, his youthful curiosity drowning out Boromir's hissed warning. The pebble tumbled, bounced, then fell and fell and fell. The silence that followed stretched thinner than spider's silk before the distant splash shattered it like glass. From somewhere in the labyrinth of tunnels came answering noises, scrabbling, clicking, the rustle of things uncoiling. Gimli's axe flashed as he spun toward the sound, his beard bristling. "Orcs," he growled, though the word couldn't quite cover the chill slithering down their spines. Gandalf's brow furrowed as his fingers traced scars on the wall's gouges too deep for any pickaxe, their edges blackened as if by heat. The mines had changed since his last passage. New tunnels gaped like wounds, their rough-hewn walls speaking of haste and hunger rather than dwarven craft. "We are not alone here," he admitted at last, the confession settling over them like ash. Aragorn's hand found the hilt of his sword, his eyes scanning the ceiling where shadows pooled thicker than they should. Even Legolas, who feared little, stood unnaturally still, his keen ears catching what the others could not. a breath slow and measured from the depths below. Not orcs, something that made orcs flee. For 3 nights they pressed onward, sleeping in shifts on cold stone, jumping at every drip of water that sounded too much like footsteps. The further they descended, the heavier the air became, not just with age, but with a presence, ancient and patient. Frodo's fingers closed around the ring beneath his shirt, its weight suddenly unbearable. He alone seemed to feel it, the way the darkness pressed closer when no one was looking, how whispers slithered just beyond the edge of hearing. "It knows we're here," he said softly, and no one asked what he meant. Then came the chamber of Mazarbul. The light of Gandalf's staff fell upon shattered shields, upon dwarven bones still clad in rusted mail, and upon the book. Its pages crackled as the wizard turned them, revealing Balin's final scrawl. "They are coming." The ink might as well have been fresh, so sharply did the words cut the silence. Boromir backed toward the door, his shield raised. "We cannot linger." The first orc arrow struck the wall beside his head. The second found flesh. Chaos erupted as black shapes poured from every crevice, their guttural cries ringing off the stone. Swords clashed, arrows sang, and through it all, a new sound rose, a deep, shuddering groan, as if the mountain itself were waking beneath their feet. The orcs faltered, their yellow eyes widening in something beyond fear. They knew. Gandalf's voice sliced through the din like a blade. Out now, the Fellowship ran, their flight a blur of torchlight and terror, down stairs that spiraled into blackness. The bridge loomed ahead, slender as a knife's edge over the fathomless chasm. They were so close, then the darkness behind them moved. Fire erupted from the abyss, painting the walls in hellish light as the Balrog unfurled itself to its full, monstrous height. Wings of shadow blotted out the ceiling, and in its hand, a whip of living flame cracked the air like thunder. Gandalf turned on the bridge, his staff blazing with white light. "You cannot pass," he commanded, and for the first time since entering Moria, the Fellowship understood true power and true sacrifice. The rest was fire and falling, and a cry that would haunt their dreams long after the mountain's gates lay far behind. The mines had taken their price at last, and deep below, where no foot would tread again, something that had slept for centuries smiled in the dark, its ember eyes closing once more, but not forever. The orcs came like a flood, their twisted faces snarling in the torchlight as they surged from every crack and crevice of Moria's broken halls. Swords clashed, arrows hissed through the stale air, and the Fellowship fought as one, backs pressed together, blades cutting through the tide of gnashing teeth and rusted scimitars. Aragorn's sword gleamed like a sliver of moonlight in the chaos, each strike precise, each step measured, but even his skill couldn't hold back the endless tide. To the bridge, Gandalf's voice boomed over the din, his staff blazing like a beacon in the suffocating dark. They ran, their boots pounding against the stone, the orcs' screeches closing in behind them. The air grew hotter, thicker, as if the mountain itself was breathing, a slow, rhythmic pulse beneath their feet. Then came the sound none of them could mistake, a deep, resonant groan, like stone splitting under an unimaginable weight. The orcs hesitated, their yellow eyes darting toward the abyss below. Even in their bloodlust, they knew what stirred in the depths. The Bridge of Khazad-dûm stretched before them, slender and fragile as a thread over the endless chasm. One by one, the Fellowship dashed across, their shadows flickering against the cavern walls, Legolas turned, his bow drawn, an arrow already finding its mark in an orc's throat. Boromir shepherded the hobbits forward, his shield deflecting a hail of black feathered shafts, and then light, not torchlight, not starlight, but a hellish glow rising from the pit, painting the ancient stones in shades of blood and burning coal. The Balrog emerged like a nightmare-given form, its crown of flame licking the ceiling, its wings, whether shadow or substance, unfurling with a sound like tearing parchment. The creature's whip cracked the air, sending sparks raining down onto the bridge, and for a heartbeat, even the orcs froze in terror. Gandalf stood firm at the bridge's center, his staff blazing brighter than ever, his voice cutting through the furnace heat. "You cannot pass." The words rang with a power older than the mountain itself, a command woven into the bones of the world. Fire met light in a clash that shook the cavern. The Balrog roared, its fury shaking loose stones from the ceiling, but Gandalf held his ground. The Fellowship watched, breathless, as the wizard's will strained against the demon's might. Then the bridge groaned, cracked, and with a final, earth-shattering cry, the Balrog plunged into the abyss, its flames swallowed by the dark silence. The orcs fled, their shrieks fading into the tunnels. The Fellowship stood stunned, their victory hollow as Gandalf's fingers slipped from the ledge. Frodo's cry was lost in the thunder of falling stone, and as the dust settled, Moria exhaled, its halls emptier, its shadows deeper, its ancient hunger unsatisfied. Somewhere far below, embers still glowed. The mountain remembered, and so would they. Gandalf planted his staff against the trembling stone, its white light flaring against the Balrog's furnace glow. The air itself seemed to recoil from their clash ancient power, meeting older darkness. "Run," he commanded, and for once, even Aragorn did not argue. The Fellowship stumbled back, their eyes wide with horror, as the wizard stood alone on the crumbling bridge, his robes whipping in the scorching updraft. The Balrog's whip lashed forward, a tongue of living flame, but Gandalf's voice rang out like a hammer striking anvil. "You shall not pass." The words weren't merely speech, they were a force woven into the world's bones. The bridge trembled, then split with a crack that echoed through the caverns like the ending of an age. Stone groaned, the Balrog roared, and for a heartbeat, the demon wavered, its fire dimming in the face of something older than mountains. Then the ledge gave way. Frodo's scream was lost in the thunder of falling rock as Gandalf and the Balrog plunged together into the abyss, the wizard's staff flashing once more, a final spark of defiance before the darkness swallowed them whole. The chasm exhaled a gust of heat and ash, scattering the orcs like leaves in a gale. Silence followed, deeper than any the minds had known in centuries. Legolas was the first to move, his fingers slack around his bow. "He's gone," he whispered, as if saying it louder might make it real. Gimli's axe slipped from his grip, clattering against the stone, a sound too small for such a loss. Boromir crossed himself, his lips forming a prayer older than Gondor, while Merry and Pippin clung to each other, their faces streaked with dust and disbelief. Only Aragorn dared step toward the edge, his jaw clenched against the heat, still rising from below. Then, from the depths, faint but unmistakable, came a sound that froze their blood: laughter. Not the Balrog's triumphant bellow, but Gandalf's wry, weary, and somehow unbroken. "Fly, you fools," it echoed, as if whispered directly into their minds. The words carried no spell, only a truth too sharp to ignore. The mountain shuddered again, this time with the weight of settling stone. Somewhere far below, fire and shadow continued their dance, but the bridge was gone. The path was sealed, and the fellowship, now 8 where there had been 9, turned their faces toward the eastern gate, carrying not just grief, but the unshakable knowing that some battles are not won, only ended. The eastern gates of Moria stood open at last, not in welcome, but in release, as if the mountain itself was glad to be rid of them. Cold daylight spilled across the fellowship's faces as they staggered onto the slopes of the Dimril Dale, their breaths ragged, their clothes reeking of smoke and sweat. No one spoke. The hobbits' hands trembled as they clutched their packs, their eyes hollow with a loss too fresh to name. Aragorn kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, his jaw set so tight it might have been carved from the same stone as the mines behind them. Only Gimli turned back, just once, his fingers tightening around his axe handle until his knuckles whitened. The mountain loomed, silent and indifferent, its peaks dusted with snow that gleamed too brightly in the sun. Legolas was the first to break the silence. He knew, the elf murmured, his voice softer than the wind through the pines. From the moment we entered those gates, he knew what awaited him. Boromir exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples as if trying to erase the memory of fire and falling stone. Then why did he lead us there? The words came out harsher than he intended, and he winced, glancing at Frodo. But the ring-bearer said nothing. He stood apart from the others, his fingers absently tracing the chain around his neck, his thoughts lost in some shadowed place between grief and guilt. Aragorn finally turned, his cloak stirring in the breeze. Because it was the only way, he said, his voice low but steady, and because that was who he was. There was no reproach in his words, only a quiet certainty that settled over them like a mantle. Gandalf had chosen the path knowing its end, not with resignation, but with that same stubborn spark that had once lit his pipe in the face of a Balrog's roar. The hobbits blinked up at Aragorn, their cheeks streaked with dirt and tears, and something in his look made them stand a little straighter. Night fell gently over the valley, the stars emerging one by one, as if hesitant to witness their sorrow. They camped in a hollow between 2 great rocks, too weary to light a fire, too heartsick to eat. Pippin sat with his knees drawn to his chest, staring at the untouched bread in his hands. "Do you think it hurt?" he whispered. Merry wrapped an arm around his shoulders, his own voice thick. "Not for long," he lied. Above them, the same stars that had watched Durin's folk carve their kingdom now watched the fellowship gather their scattered courage. Somewhere in the dark, a lone bird sang, a thin, sweet sound that seemed to carry all the loneliness in the world. Come dawn, Aragorn shook the frost from his cloak and stood. "We go on," he said, and there was no other choice. The hobbits rose slowly, their movements stiff with cold and grief, but they followed. Boromir shouldered his pack with a grim nod, his eyes lingering on the mountain's silhouette. Even Gimli, after a last, long look at the sealed gates, turned his face eastward. Only Frodo lingered, his hand pressed to his chest, as if to quiet the weight beneath his shirt. The ring felt heavier now, as though Gandalf's fall had added to its burden, but the wizard's voice echoed in his memory, warmer than the Balrog's fire. "All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." One by one, they walked away from Moria, their footsteps leaving no mark on the stubborn earth. Behind them, the mountain stood as it always had, a tomb for kings, a prison for demons, a riddle with no answer. The wind sighed through its empty halls, carrying the faintest whisper of hammer strokes, or laughter, or perhaps just the memory of both. The fellowship did not look back again. Dawn was breaking, and the road ahead stretched long. The memory of Khazad-dûm burned bright in the hearts of Durin's folk long after its halls fell silent. In the great stone libraries of Erebor, scribes etched its history into thick parchment, not as a cautionary tale, but as a promise. Parents showed their children the old maps, tracing the great staircases and forges with calloused fingers, their voices dropping to whispers when they reached the black pit. One day, they'd say, and the young ones would nod, their eyes wide with dreams of mithril veins and unclaimed glory. Even in exile, the dwarves carried Moria with them, in the way they carved their doorframes with interlocking runes, in the way their smiths still tempered steel with techniques perfected in those lost forges, in the stubborn set of their jaws when merchants asked why no one delved there anymore. The elves who had once traded starlight for Khazad-dûm's treasures sang laments for its fall, but their songs spoke of dwarven pride, not demon fire. In the golden woods of Lothlorien, where Malorn leaves drifted like falling coins, Galadriel herself kept a goblet of Mithril from the mountain's golden age. When the moonlight struck it just so, the metal seemed to remember its home, casting reflections that danced like miners' lanterns in the deep. They will return, Celeborn murmured once, watching those flickering lights. His lady did not disagree, yet time wears even the sharpest memories smooth. As centuries unspooled, fewer caravans brave the Red Horn Pass to glimpse the sealed gates. The men of Dale spoke less of Durin's heirs and more of dragon gold, while the hobbits of the Shire forgot the name Moria entirely, until a chance meeting in a crowded inn, when a gray-cloaked wizard mentioned it to a wide-eyed halfling. Dwarves don't belong in holes, Bilbo Baggins declared later, puffing his pipe. They belong in mountains, and though his listeners laughed, something in his tone made them pause. The mountain, for its part, waited. Winds scoured its peaks, rains filled its upper chambers with shallow lakes, and still the lower halls lay undisturbed. No pickaxe rang, no boot scuffed the dust, until the stars themselves seemed to lean closer, and whispers traveled from Rivendell to the Iron Hills. The One Ring had been found. In Erebor's throne room, King Dane Ironfoot stroked his beard, his gaze drifting west. The time may come, he told his council, when Moria is more than a ghost story. The eldest among them shifted uneasily. They remembered the drums, and far below, where no living thing had walked in ages, the Balrog stirred in its sleep. Its dreams were of fire and falling stone, of a voice shouting in the dark, words it had not heard since a wizard's staff flared white on a crumbling bridge. The mountain held its breath. Some silences are not eternal. Some doors are not meant to stay shut. The Balrog's flame dimmed as it coiled deeper into the roots of the mountain, its rage spent, for now. The caverns where it slithered still bore the scars of its wrath. Walls blackened where its whip had lashed, stone melted into grotesque shapes where its fire had pooled. Yet the creature did not sleep, not truly. It rested like a smoldering ember, its glow faint but unextinguished, waiting for the day the mines would call it forth again. The air in those lightless pits hung thick with the scent of burnt sulfur, and if any dared to listen, they might hear the slow, rhythmic pulse of its breath, a sound like distant thunder trapped beneath the earth. Above, the upper halls of Moria stood empty, but not untouched. Even in the Balrog's absence, its influence seeped through the stone like poison. Orcs avoided the deepest delvings, their chieftains hissing warnings to the young and reckless. Dig too far, they'd snarl, and you'll wake the old fire. Some claimed the tunnels themselves remembered the demon's tread, that certain passages grew warmer at night, or that water trickling down the walls sometimes steamed, as if the mountain's blood ran hot. Merchants who camped near the gates spoke of dreams, visions of a crown of flame, of wings vast enough to blot out the sun, and a voice that whispered in a language older than sorrow. For the dwarves, Moria became both grief and ghost story. In the taverns of the Iron Hills, where ale flowed as freely as tall tales, old miners would lift their mugs and toast to the Mithril crown, their voices dropping as they added, and to the shadow that took it. The young ones leaned in, wide-eyed, as their elders traced the scars on their arms, some from orc blades, others from burns no forge could explain. Pride built Khazad-dûm, they'd mutter, but greed buried it. Yet even as they warned, their fingers would itch for their picks, their gazes drifting west toward the mountains. The lure of Mithril was a song no dwarf could ignore forever. And so the legend grew, woven into the fabric of Middle-earth itself. Rangers guiding travelers through the Red Horn Pass would pause beneath the mountain's shadow, their hands resting on their sword hilts. Listen, they'd say, and for a moment, all would fall silent. No wind, no bird song, just the weight of something watching from the dark. The elves, with their long memories, simply called it Durin's doom, a phrase that carried the weight of prophecy. Even the hobbits, who cared little for mountains and less for demons, shuddered when their chimney fires burned too bright, as if reminded of a story they'd half heard in childhood. But the Balrog cared nothing for legends. It waited, patient as the stone around it, its fire banked but never dying. Somewhere above, the world turned. Seasons changed, kingdoms rose and fell, and deep in the dark, where no light would ever reach, embers glowed not in hunger, not in fury, but in expectation. The mountain had been disturbed once. It would be again. Whispers began in the smoky corners of Dwarven taverns, passed between miners with dirt still under their fingernails and smiths, whose anvils had gone cold too soon. Durin walks again, they'd murmur, their voices barely louder than the clink of ale mugs. In the Iron Hills, where the wind carried echoes of lost kingdoms, young dwarves tilted their heads at the stories, their eyes glinting with something sharper than curiosity reckoning. The elders warned them with half-hearted scowls, their hands tightening around tankards of bitter ale. Fool's hope, one might grumble, but even his voice lacked conviction. Because every dwarf knew, Durin never died, not truly. He slept in the stone, waiting to wake when his people needed him most, and the signs were everywhere, if you knew how to look. A vein of mithril found in the Erd Luin, thin but unmistakable, shimmering like a trail of breadcrumbs leading home. A riddle carved into the walls of Erebber's deepest vault, its runes fresh despite the dust of centuries. Even the ravens spoke of it, their black eyes knowing as they croaked to anyone who'd listen. The stone remembers. High in her tower of Lorien, Galadriel let the vision come to her, a dwarf king with eyes like polished jet, standing before the sealed gates of Moria, his axe raised not in war, but in homecoming. She said nothing. Some prophecies were best left to unfold in their own time. The mountain, for its part, kept its silence. No tremors shook its roots. No phantom hammers echoed through its halls. Yet sometimes, when the moon hung low over the Misty Mountains, shepherds in the Dimril Dale would catch a flicker of movement near the eastern gate. Not orcs or bats, but something steadier, something purposeful. A shadow, pausing to trace the worn carvings with calloused fingers before melting back into the night. The dwarves were coming, not as conquerors, not as desperate fugitives, but as heirs. And deep below, where the air tasted of burnt stone and old vengeance, the Balrog stirred in its chains of shadow. Flames licked at its claws as it lifted its massive head, sensing the shift in the mountain's bones. It had slept long, but dwarves had a way of shaking the world awake. Somewhere above, a pickaxe struck stone. Once, twice, a sound like a heartbeat returning. The creature smiled, its ember eyes flaring in the dark. Let them come. The mountain had been patient. So had it. The forge fires burned low in the blue mountains, their glow painting the young dwarf's face in flickering gold as he stared into the embers. Thrain's fingers traced the worn handle of his grandfather's hammer, the one that had swung in Moria's halls before the darkness came. Sleep had eluded him for nights, ever since the dreams began. Visions of vast halls drowned in shadow, of a crown beneath the mountain, and of something deeper still, watching. He exhaled, his breath stirring the coals, when suddenly the air behind him grew heavy, thick with the scent of hot iron and ancient stone. A hand came to rest on his shoulder, weightier than any living touch, solid as bedrock. Thrain turned, his pulse roaring in his ears, and there he stood. Durin, not as the statues carved him, regal and remote, but as the miners had whispered, eyes like polished onyx, beard braided with mithril threads still bright after ages, his very presence humming with the song of the deep earth. The young dwarf's voice caught in his throat, but Durin spoke first, his voice resonating not through air, but through bone. "You hear the mountains call," he said, and it wasn't a question. Thrain's fingers clenched around the hammer. "Let me gather the clans," he pleaded. "The orcs scatter like roaches in sunlight. We could take back the halls." Durin's gaze silenced him. In those dark eyes, Thrain saw the truth, the glint of mithril veins twisting like roots through stone, the flicker of fire where no flame should be, and beneath it all, a patience older than kingdoms. "The crown waits," Durin murmured, "but so does the shadow. Would you wake the dragon to slay the wolf?" The vision shifted. Thrain saw armies marching under the mountain, their torches guttering out one by one as the darkness moved, swallowing their shouts, their hope, their names. Durin's grip tightened, not in anger, but in kinship. "You are my blood," he said, "and blood remembers. The mountain is not ready, nor are you." Thrain flinched as the words struck deeper than any blade. For the first time, he noticed the scars on Durin's hands, not wounds of battle, but the marks of a craftsman, burns from forges long cold, calluses from tools lost to time. The king's voice softened. Khazad-dûm was never just stone and metal. It was will and will. He placed a hand over Thrain's chest, where his heart hammered like a pick against rock, endures. The vision shattered like glass. Thrain gasped awake on the forge floor, the embers before him dead and gray, but his palm stung. Unclenching it, he found a sliver of mithril embedded in his skin, glowing faintly as if lit from within. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the peaks of the Misty Mountains, gilding the distant pass where the gates of Moria lay hidden. The young dwarf rose, his grandfather's hammer suddenly lighter in his grasp. Somewhere beneath the world, drums beat in the dark, but Thrain turned his face to the sunrise. The stone would keep, and so would he. The last echoes of dwarven hammers fade into the mountain's memory, leaving behind only the faintest shimmer of mithril in the dark, a glimmer that refuses to be extinguished. This is the legacy of Moria, not just a cautionary tale of pride and ruin, but a testament to the stubborn light that lingers in the deepest shadows. For every fall recounted in its halls, there's a whisper of return. For every king lost to the darkness, a heir waiting in the wings. The dwarves may have fled, their forges cold and their bridges broken, but look closer. In the Iron Hills, a smith's apprentice saves a sliver of mithril under his pillow. In Erebor, an elder traces the old runes on a map, his finger pausing at the gates of Moria. Even the wind that howls through the empty chambers carries something more than grief. It carries the scent of sparks waiting to be struck. The story of Khazad-dûm is etched not just in stone, but in the very bones of Middle-earth. Elves sing of its fall with bittersweet refrains. Men trade fragments of its legend like rare coins, and hobbits shiver at fireside tales of the black pit with wings. But the dwarves, they speak of it in the quiet between words, in the way a craftsman's hand hesitates over a vein of ore, in the way a mother tucks her child in with stories of halls that will one day ring with laughter again. The mountain remembers its people, and they remember it not as a tomb, but as a promise. So let the tale settle around you like the dust of ages. Close your eyes and listen. Beneath the silence, there's a rhythm, faint but unbroken. Perhaps it's the distant drip of water in the deep, or the sigh of wind through cracked stone, or perhaps it's something else, the patient heartbeat of a kingdom that refuses to end. The Balrog may sleep, the gates may stay sealed, but remember this: Mithril shines brightest in the dark, and somewhere, beyond the reach of torchlight, a pickaxe lies waiting in the stone, its handle worn smooth by hands that have yet to find it. The story of Moria isn't over, it's only resting.